I'm joined by keyboard player and producer Matt Wilde. Born and raised in Manchester, he first came onto my radar with his 2021 release Dilla Impresses Me, and I've been a huge fan of his music ever since. With his debut album Hello World dropping just a few days ago on famous Manchester label Band on the Wall Recordings, 2023 looks like it's going to be a very big year for him. Thank you so much for joining me for this little chat. It's an honour to have you on and to pick your brains about music. First and foremost, how are you doing, and how's the reaction been to the release of the new album just a few days ago?
Yo, Luke, thank you so much for having me, man. Just wanted to say that first and foremost. It's great to meet you and chat about music. So yeah, it's been good, man. Just taking it all in, soaking it in, trying to, not move too quickly and create a bit of space in my life to take this moment in, and be present for the for what's going on, really, so that I can, I guess, make memories of this moment rather than be in the midst and flow of like trying to push it and just like go at a million miles an hour, which I'm quite guilty of sometimes. So just trying to breathe and just enjoy it, man.
Yeah, and how's the reaction been? Like, I know it's only been a couple of days, but yeah, have people been enjoying it?
Yeah, honestly, it's been really nice. For me, just even one or two messages that are like personal, mean the world to me, really. I'd rather reach just a handful of people who really enjoy the music and, makes them feel something, than, millions of streams or whatever. Because, ultimately, that's kind of why I'm making the music, really, is to try and communicate something about myself that I can't in words,
Sure.
So it's been good.
Nice. And so for this first part of the interview, I just wanted to get a little bit into how you got involved in music, your influences and things like that. So I was reading up on you a little bit earlier and doing my Nardwuar research. And I saw that your mum immigrated to Manchester from Poland.
Yeah.
So what sort of music were you hearing in your house growing up? Was there Polish influence, or was there a lot of Manchester-based stuff, or was it something completely different?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Luke, honestly. Thanks for asking it. So, my mum immigrated to Manchester from Poland 35 years ago now, I think. So I was born in the UK and in Manchester, and I've lived here my whole life. Been more or less anyway. So, so growing up, so just a bit of a backstory, really. My mum grew up as a pianist. She was playing the piano. And she grew up in a politically different time in Poland. It was like post-communism in Poland, post-Russian Revolution. Sure. And it was quite a challenging time, actually. A time that I can't really even comprehend, despite all the stories I've heard, And she was doing a lot of playing, some teaching, trying to get out there in her mid to late 20s. And she had the opportunity to travel to the UK on a bursary, like a scholarship, through the British Council, who'd heard about her and her music. And she chose Manchester. So Manchester became her home, away from Poland. And so I was born however many years later, and growing up, I had different musical influences. Predominantly at home was like classical or mostly like classical music in my house, and recordings, videos, records, and then also just my mum playing and practicing as well.
Sure.
And so that was kind of what I was hearing a lot of on one hand, but on the other hand, I have a sister who's 8 years older than me, and I was really inspired by the music she was listening to. She had a massive collection of music, and that really got me started listening and really being fired up to make music, actually.
Sure.
She was listening to loads of different kind of music, but the record which really got me was I was probably about eight or so, and I was listening to like Immortal Technique.
Okay.
I don't know if you know them. Immortal Technique. Forget the name of the album now, but it has like Dance with the Devil on it, and a few others. And that's like, that's quite a heavy introduction to hip hop. Like at such a young age, like 8, and I think that's kind of like, kind of was raised on that kind of music actually, and became obsessed with it. The way it made me feel, it was like watching a movie, but like even better to me. So
so it's kind of a mix of classical stuff and the hip hop coming in a little bit later.
So I was never really interested in classical music. My ears were switched off really. They were on, but they were off. That was never my thing. Never even got started playing the piano. Although people might think, you've got a parent who's like doing this at a professional level. I wasn't really that interested in that paradigm or that way of learning music. I think I came to it on my own later on, and really just forged my own path and started collecting records from a young age. Firstly influenced by my sister, who's, I had the privilege of who was older than me, So I just used to like steal her iPod and listen to whatever she was listening to,
Yeah, for sure. I was going to ask that actually. I guess, you would have thought that with your mum being a pianist, that would have been your way into playing piano. When was it you actually started getting interested in playing it yourself?
I guess there are different ways of telling this same story, and I guess like my memory, I guess depending on which day it is and how I'm feeling, I might tell this story differently. But if I'm being super honest, I grew up with a piano in the house. So I think even though I wasn't like learning in terms of lessons or interested in having piano lessons or whatever, I was around a piano. And from a young age, it's interesting, Luke, because looking back now, when I first started to learn the piano and take it seriously, I already knew all of the names of the notes. I knew lots of chords. So there was obviously some osmosis thing going on at an earlier age that kind of taught me about the piano. And my earliest memory was kind of playing like video games like Final Fantasy and watching like, TV programs, like anime and stuff, and being really inspired by, the music that I was hearing there. And I would learn some of the tunes by ear and then try and play them on the piano. So that's like my earliest memory. But then I wouldn't really, I've never really thought about that as like when I was learning to play. I guess the point in my life that I would, timestamp it as is probably like around 16 years old or so, listening to a lot of Dilla. And I remember listening to a beat called Life. I don't know if you've heard it.
I'm sure I've heard it.
Yeah, but like a lot of Dilla fans, there was like a 15-20 minute looped version on YouTube.
Okay.
And I just stumbled upon it. I'd listened to a lot of, Dilla's stuff up until that point, but never this tune. And just listened to it and listened to the whole thing, 15-20 minutes. And every time the loop went round, I was hearing something new. And honestly, It might sound a bit corny, but it just, it resonated with me so deeply that I just had to know what was going on. And so I found the sample from the record, or rather the record that was sampled, and then listened to that whole album. And it was Bill Evans's Portraits in Jazz, Blue and Green, that version. So I listened to the whole of Portraits in Jazz, and then the next day started to learn the piano. Learn the piano. And it was mostly self-taught from then on out, actually. But I guess I've jumped a little bit, and we've spoken specifically about playing the piano. Yeah. But I started making beats like in year 7 of school. So for those who maybe don't know what that is, that's probably like 11 years old, 12 years old. And I grew up around a lot of MCs and rappers from where I'm from. And I was I'd never really had the facade to like spit bars or, do that kind of thing like ciphers and whatnot. So I decided I'll make beats for everyone, Nice. And so I started making beats around 11, 12 years old in year 7 in school. And so there was kind of like this moment that kind of joined really. So I was making a lot of beats, listening to a lot of producers, and then Life, Dilla, and that just changed my course of action actually. And from then on out, I just started practicing piano every day. And I've probably not missed a day since, really. And that's like 10 years plus. So, yeah.
Nice. And so at that time, then I guess when you first started making beats at like 11 or 12, what sort of were you like trying to emulate other producers? What sort of people were you listening to then?
So I was listening to, I was kind of actually. I was listening to a lot of like UK hip hop, like like Jest. I was listening to a lot of Jest, but I was also listening to like US hip hop. But actually, I was listening to a lot of grime. So I was listening to like like early Boy Better Know, Skepta, JME, Akala, Gets, Tinchy Strider, like before he went mainstream, Chip. Yeah, all these people, I was kind of like, I grew up listening to that. So I was really making like 140 BPM sort of I was making like grime, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was still listening to UK hip hop. I don't think I really categorized it in this kind of a way.
Sure.
But yeah, so that's kind of what I was making and listening to. And yeah, for sure, man, I was emulating it. But for me, I remember the emulation part being really about like the kind of particular sounds that I was hearing. And I just was always mystified, like, how do I get that sound? Like whether it's a sort of bass tone or a synth sound or even like the sort of drum samples I was hearing. And I used to find that so difficult to like figure out what was going on, And it was just a massive trial and error. I reckon now, if I was 12 again now, I'd be able to get there much quicker, like so much more information.
I remember, those sort of days. I guess I was starting to produce music at the same sort of time. Like you didn't have all the, like now if you want to find something, you can just Google it and it'll be like, what's this sound from this? And you could find it. Before you had like old forums where you had to like dig and find these little samples and things from old grime songs and things like that. At that time, what sort of software were you using when you first started then?
Yeah, I was using FL Studio, or as it was called then, Fruity Loops. So I was using Fruity Loops or FL Studio, and then I moved pretty quickly onto Ableton, and I think it was like Ableton 8, maybe even Ableton 7. I don't know. We're on 11 now.
Yeah.
So I started using Ableton probably within about 2 years of FL Studio. And it was like running off a old hand-me-down sort of HP laptop with some like aux plug-in speakers, just like a real DIY setup. And that just felt like everything to me at the moment. At that time, that felt like my world, my everything, but looking back now, it was pretty, it's pretty sweet just to think about, how little I was making music with, which is, the opposite of what I'm doing now.
That's true, yeah. But it goes to show, you can make music with anything. If you just got a laptop and a tiny little headphones or whatever, iPod,
100%.
But you can make it with anything. What I want to do now is kind of move to talking a little bit about your creative process now, and also how you created the new album, Hello World. The first thing I wanted to ask was, how long have you been working on the album? And was it like a conscious decision to make an album, or was it something that just happened over time?
So the first demo I wrote in January.
Okay.
I want to say January 22. So that was like the very first demo, the first loop, the first idea.
Sure.
And then the rest of the ideas happened pretty quickly after. So my process, broadly speaking, I try and write something new every day.
Okay.
That might be something really small, like 4 seconds long, a little loop, maybe 8 seconds. But I try and write something new every day. So this album originally was probably a batch from, like a selection from a batch between January 22 and maybe April 22.
Right.
And so the ideas were all written pretty quickly, in quick succession at least. And no, didn't set out with the intention to create an album. It's just when a bit of time had passed and I'd listened to those ideas, there was something succinct about them.
Sure.
There was something, the sound, the tone, the style, what I was feeling and hearing, obviously, at that time. seemed to gel and marry. And so that's when I thought, this could be really exciting. The potential of finishing these tracks together and telling that story and journey through this particular period in time.
Sure.
So the album idea came a little bit later.
Right. And why? I was thinking about it, listening to the album. Why did you go for the name Hello World?
So a few reasons, really. So the artwork of the record, which I'll just show here.
Beautiful.
That's like, incredible painting. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But
sure.
The artwork is a doorway, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the doorway to the house I grew up in. And I guess the sentiment around that kind of letting go of the past, forging a new way forward. There's an animation that was created to accompany that artwork, which is like the door opening.
Sure. And
so like the idea of giving the audience or, fans or whatever, a piece of me, like this is like, I exist, I'm here. Hello world, like, I don't know. It's just kind of like, a way to share a little bit about me, really, musically. So that's where that title came from.
Nice.
Yeah, and it was kind of like jointly created with the artwork in mind as well.
Right. Have you had that artwork for a while then, with that idea?
Yeah, sketches for sure. So and so that's kind of the title, really. Another thing is I think a lot about like why I make music and almost like what the why is for me. Because when I make music, I experience a range of emotions that I just don't in everyday life.
Sure.
Like the outermost edges of emotion, like could be like anxiety, confusion, could be like euphoria and feeling like really energetic, optimistic and hopeful. Sometimes like anger or stress, like the outermost edges of emotion.
Yeah.
And that's my favorite thing about writing music is to explore that and like feel that and try and express it through, in my case, specifically like the piano.
Sure.
And I was doing some reading around the time of writing the demos, like early 22. And I can't remember exactly where it's from, but I was reading an article about ornithologists who are essentially people who study birds, right?
Yeah.
And I was reading this article about why birds sing. And this group of ornithologists said that birds sing, or at least they agreed that birds sing when the sun rises first thing in the morning as a way to communicate with their friends and family, to say, I made it through the night. I'm still here. And I sometimes think that maybe that's sounds really silly or corny, but like that's kind of the closest depiction of how I feel when I make music. Maybe that's why we sing, or why we make art, as a way to say, hello, I'm still here. I made it. This is just a tiny piece of me. And so that kind of also was resonating with me at that time. Like, and Hello World just felt fitting.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting. I had a quick scan through the credits on Bandcamp, and I noticed that you've got like a whole host of incredible collaborators on there, likes of Cartoons, Natty Reeves from Brighton. Shout out Brighton. What was the process of recording like for you? Was any of it done in the studio with other artists, or was there a lot of like remote collaborations happening?
Super mixed. So we've just come off the back of like COVID, pandemic, lockdown here in the UK. And during that time, I was actively writing music with other people. So was super accustomed to doing things remotely.
Right.
But now the world's opened up again. Hello world, maybe. I don't know. Maybe that's in the back of my mind. But the world's kind of opened up again. And so this album is a strange checkpoint, really, a bit of a milestone where, slightly more than half of the collaborations were done remotely.
Sure.
And then the rest in the studio. Airtight Studios in Chorlton in Manchester.
Okay.
So kind of a mix, really, which is a bit unusual maybe. or at least so I've been told. But it worked, man. I think it worked, and yeah, that's kind of how that came to be.
Yeah, well, to me, listening to it, a lot of it just sounds like a live recording, a lot of it to me. So I guess that kind of tells you a little bit about it. But for you then, like starting a track when you're collaborating with people not in the same room and things, how does a track start for you? What are you starting with the piano loop? Are you starting with the drums, or does it completely depend on the situation?
Totally depends on the situation, but for this particular album, I would hazard a guess that all tracks were started on the piano.
Okay.
I think I was just going through a period of time where, like I was saying before, I was just trying to write something new every day, and instead of like plugging in all my peripherals like charger, hard drives, monitors, headphones, plug sockets, I have an acoustic piano just here. And so
nice.
What easier way than just to sit down and play something?
Sure.
I don't need to worry about tech or looking at a screen or, whatever it is. I can just sit down and play. So I think every track on this project started with some melodic idea on the piano.
Sure.
That I then later kind of like worked on.
Sure. Were you like recording those just like as a voice note on your phone to start with then, I guess?
Exactly.
So you didn't forget. And then that process then from let's say on a track like Figuring, you've got the piano part. What would come next? I guess you're using Ableton now, you said.
Yeah, Ableton now. Yeah, I was probably like drums, to be honest.
Okay.
I would then kind of think about feel and how to make it feel good, right? So I'd kind of have the original idea. It might be slightly out of time. It might not be landing in a way that feels good when it comes to like thinking about other instruments. And so there's like an initial idea that then goes through a process of like being refined when it comes to like interacting with other instruments. So probably drums next.
Sure. And on what's your kind of process like on Ableton? Are you using what are you doing to record your drums and stuff? Are you playing them in? Are you drawing them in? How does that work for you?
For Figuring specifically, I played those in and sometimes draw them in, but usually I try and get hands on and then maybe nudge things around after if things aren't quite feeling right.
Sure.
Yeah, and then I might make some edits depending on the other elements like the piano. Maybe like the kick wants to interact like later on if I have like some hits going on. Maybe I'll draw those in after the fact. But the bare bones is finger drumming, I guess you would call it, on Ableton Push.
Right.
I've got a bunch of kits that I've saved over the years of drum sounds that I like. And so, yeah, that's kind of the process of creating those drums, specifically for Figuring anyway.
Nice. And then on that track specifically, so I guess you had Cartoons on bass and Rebecca Reed, right, on strings.
Yeah.
How did you go from what you'd originally made to then get those two involved?
So during like lockdown, I was learning to play bass, something I've always wanted to do. And so I wanted to get to the point where I could at least play a bit on my tracks.
Sure.
So I played bass on the original demo, and then it just wasn't, I was talking about feel before.
Sure.
It just wasn't the feeling wasn't there, like rhythm, time feel. So I'd collaborated with Ben or Cartoons on a previous project, and then saw him at the show that he did recently, or semi-recently at least, in Manchester. So we kind of reignited that relationship in a way, and reached out to him to see if he'd be up for being involved in this project. To my surprise, he said, yeah, I'm down. And so he kind of kept true to the bass that I'd played, at least melodically, but then just took it to a whole other level, And then Rebecca Reed. So I was thinking about how to like build that track specifically, how to take it to a new place. And I just couldn't I could just hear strings in my mind and imagination. And so like the bass, I had some MIDI strings, I guess. I kind of was thinking about harmony, and it just really worked. And I knew straight away that these MIDI strings just weren't it. I wanted to reach out to someone who has feel and can just bless the song with their feel and talent, And so that's when I reached out to Rebecca.
Nice. And it's an incredible track. I guess if you're going to get anyone on bass, Cartoons is probably one of the best you get. And what Rebecca did with the strings sounds amazing as well. But yeah, I like how simple it is. Like you said, it's just like those 4 elements. And
yeah, man.
Sometimes that's all you need.
Mm-hmm.
And then another question I wanted to ask. We have a lot of like producers and beat makers listening in. Do you have any like go-to plugins and things that you use on everything? Is there anything that's like essential to your production process?
Yeah, so I use a lot of Ableton stock plugins. Firstly, just want to shout out Ableton because they're low CPU, and I think I just got into a workflow from a younger age when I was running, old HP laptops, where Ableton stock plugins were just the thing that I could handle at that time.
Sure.
So EQ8, which is an Ableton plugin, is essential. I use their glue compressor, which is kind of like an SSL G-Bus compressor, I think it's called. At least it's modeled on that. And it sounds quite similar to me, although I'm sure. Proper analog heads would beg to differ. I use those 2 on everything, pretty much on every track. And then some other plugins that I'm using a lot at the moment are the Studer A800, which is essentially like a tape machine, and that's from Universal Audio. I use that on pretty much every track. And then I'm also using different preamps. So for this album, I basically recently invested in Universal Audio interface, where you can track real time through preamps and effects. So I don't have any hardware here. So I was kind of tracking the piano and other elements through hardware real time, at least emulated versions. It's pretty cool stuff. And so for this project, I was running through a API Vision channel strip, and it's kind of like figuring out how that works, how it interacts with, the live instrument, particularly the piano. And I'm running any recorded instrument through the API Vision channel strip as a foundation really for the sound, to get that tone sort of nailed at the recording stage.
Sure.
And then there are probably other plugins as well, to be fair, Luke. I use a lot of Good Hertz audio plugins, the Wolf compressor. But on this project, I was using one of their more recent plugins, Tupe, Tupe, Tube/tape, I think. Something like that, which just has real great character, like a lo-fi sort of sound. I need to check that out for sure. The Good Hertz plugins are great, and also I'd be interested to check out the Universal Audio interface. Honestly,
has it got loads of different types of preamp?
Different preamps, wonderful plugins, kind of expensive, I would say, but worth it. And what I like about it is, I've not invested heavily into the system. I've just bought a few essentials, and I like to just own fewer things and try and get really good at using them, rather than chase the new shiny thing. As easy as it is easy for me to get to that point. I bought a few plugins like the API, like I was talking about, and just try and explore that as much as I can. So really good in that sense.
Yeah, I think that's the best way. I know I'm the opposite. I'll just buy loads of things that I never even know how to use like once or twice. I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going on here. But less is more, I think, a lot of the time. So for this final part of the interview, I wanted to talk a little bit more about Manchester and the things you've been doing in the city. And I read a little bit about what you've been doing in the scene and in the art sector. You used to work with Bridgewater Hall and Brightest Sound, and you also founded the charity Blaze Arts. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right.
Could you tell us a little bit more about what you do with Blaze Arts and why that's important to you?
Yeah, so growing up, I started getting involved in community projects
Sure.
as a way to learn more about music, basically. You know, growing up at a time where I was really interested in music tech, there was a lot of content on YouTube, but I was really interested in learning like hands-on from other people about music tech and producing beats. And I was suggested a particular community project, funnily enough, at Band on the Wall, which is like an iconic music venue in Manchester. And that was ran by another charity who was like within the building called Brightest Sound. And I went there around age 13, 14, and I was honestly blown away. Suddenly, I was around other people similar to me with similar thoughts and dreams about music. And it was amazing to get hands-on with other people and just write. Basically, the projects were like writing new music.
Nice.
And so such a diverse range of musical tastes, but we were all put in groups from project to project, and we'd write new music together. And I don't know, I think that process was just foundational, really, to my musical development, because it meant that I could sort of like, I knew when to be quiet and let other people shine.
Sure.
I kind of learned about negotiating and sharing my ideas within a group space. And yeah, that's not easy, man. I still struggle with that kind of stuff now sometimes, you know.
Sure.
But that definitely served me in my early years. And so I remember I used to go to Brighter Sound or Band on the Wall quite regularly. It was like a weekly workshop. And I remember thinking to myself, like, this is going to sound mad, but I remember thinking, like, firstly, I didn't think about it for years, but like there were project leaders, artists, facilitators who were like taking us through the process, right? Other artists who were older than us, who were kind of like helping to lead the way.
Sure.
And I never really thought about it, but one day I did. I thought, I can't believe, someone's being paid to do this. Like, is this a job? Like, quite naive of me, obviously, to think that. But it got me kind of obsessed with trying to give back and be in that kind of space more.
Sure.
And so I ended up working with Brighter Sound, like after a few years, kind of mentoring other musicians who were coming onto the projects. So that's where that side of things started for me. And then some years later, I founded a charity that was all about supporting young artists, not just musicians, but definitely musicians as well, but young people into creative careers, whatever that might be. And that's Blaze Arts. So I was doing that, full time for quite a few years. And then in 2021, handed in my notice to, pursue music full time, to be honest. And so that was quite an interesting process of, succession planning and bringing someone else into that charity.
Sure.
To then focus on music ultimately.
Sure. And then I guess, so you must have like a lot of like knowledge of the music scene in Manchester and things. Are there any artists, whether that be musicians, producers or rappers and singers and stuff, are there any artists that like you have really been enjoying recently or you've discovered recently that you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, it's too many, Luke. And who to start with? I mean, Abnormal Sleeps, KSR,
Sure.
Kin Kai, Children of Zeus, of course. Who else? We've got JSD, RJ, Prima, Pros. So many artists, Luke, honestly.
Sure.
Secret Night Gang, brilliant sort of jazz, soul, funk band out of Manchester, making waves. They're on Brownswood now.
Nice.
Brownswood Recordings. They've just dropped their second album. And they're kind of like solo artists or artists who are releasing music, but then so many wonderful musicians as well, like Aaron Wood, who plays trumpet and flugelhorn, who's on this album on 2 of the tracks, but he's also played on my other releases as well, like Dilla Impresses Me.
Nice.
Actually, no, he wasn't on that. That's my bad. But lots of other lots of other tunes.
Sure.
Stan Scott, who's a really sick bass player. He's on a couple of the tracks on the album as well. So many people, man, whose music I just really love and enjoy. yeah, and it just seems to be going from strength to strength, really. But then, I don't know, maybe I'd be biased.
Sure. Yeah, no, I've noticed since I've moved here, there's just so much going on, so many, amazing musicians and artists and different like nights and things and bands playing who are amazing in Manchester, which I don't think Brighton can compete with anyway. But so I've got like one final question that I always like to ask artists is, if you could executive produce an album for one artist in the world, living or dead, who would you pick? It's quite a hard one.
Yeah, that's a hard question. The first person that comes to mind, but I don't know about executive produce, because I'd definitely be learning a thing or two.
Sure.
But the first person, probably like the person who really changed my life musically, was J Dilla.
Okay.
And I don't know what that would look like, but to be able to work with Dilla and learn more about process and feel,
sure,
and and time feel, I think would just be insane. But then there are so many other artists as well, like singers and rappers as well.
Sure.
I don't know, man. It's hard to say, really. Maybe like a Carla or someone like that.
Yeah.
That'd be class. I think that's like, as a vocalist, someone whose music I grew up on, who I think I could really, contribute towards the music with. But yeah, so many other people as well. I mean, there are a lot of people in Manchester who I would love to work with. I mentioned Abnormal Sleeps before.
Sure.
I just love his music. If you've not heard it, defo, go check it out. Yeah, incredible, man. So I've just given you like three people.
Yeah.
Dilla, Akala, or someone closer to home, Sleeps.
Sure. Well, yeah, I've got to try and make Akala or Abnormal Sleeps happen. That'd be great. Man. Yeah, no, that'd be amazing. Thank you so much for joining me. Your new album, Hello World, is out right now. Everyone can check that out on streaming platforms as well as out on vinyl, as you just showed before. Yeah. Have you got anything else to add at all?
Nah, man. Thanks for having me, Luke. It's a pleasure to hear a bit about you as well and what you're up to with the community. I think it's really great, man. And it's much appreciated.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. And like I said, go and check out that album, Hello World, right now.